Hey guys, Tisha here, and we are back for our chapter 2 read of Love Times 3, Our Path to Plural Marriage. And we're picking up from where I left off yesterday on Joe. I didn't grow up assuming I would be a polygamist someday. It wasn't until I was a senior in high school that I really considered what kind of intimate relationship I wanted to have in my life. I had become infatuated with a girl in my class, and we spent a lot of time together after school on weekends. Despite all that time together, we never talked about religion. She was LDS, and like most of my friends, assumed I was Mormon too. Halfway through the year, though, I began to think more seriously about my life, my future, and how this relationship fit with my plans. I was heavily involved in sports, especially football, played running back, and I was the captain of our high school football team. I was weighing whether to go out for football at a junior college the next year, which was probably as far as my NFL dreams could go, or give up sports and concentrate on academics. I loved American history, especially Mormon and Native American history. With a degree in education, I could become a high school teacher, coach, and combine two interests, history and football. But a business degree, I knew was more likely to provide the lucrative income I would need to support a big family. I wanted lots of children, but wasn't sure I was capable of living plural marriage. These were my questions as relying on the teachings I had received all of my life. I turned to God for guidance. After a period of prayerful searching, I gained a better understanding of myself, how important my religion was to me, and what kind of relationship I wanted with God. I also reflected a lot on my family. I hope to live up to the example set by my ancestors whose faith, sacrifice, and dedication to their children I admired. They were hardworking, God-fearing people who striven. Y'all know how I am with words. To be the best in every aspect of their lives. My grandfathers, with whom I had been close, had strong convictions about their faith and about plural marriage, with no fear of regret despite years of persecution. Grandpa David Darger, often shared the story of his marriage in 1926 to Eliza Aladora McDaniel, which took place in the LDS Church, Salt Lake Temple, when he was 23 and she was 21. More than 2 decades earlier, the LDS Church had made its second pronouncement prohibiting plural marriage. But my grandpa Dave said that immediately after the ceremony, Apostle George Richards, the president of the temple, asked them to pledge to live plural marriage if they ever got the chance. He and Aldora promised to do so if the opportunity came. Grandpa Dave later made a covenant with God to practice plural marriage, even if it caused him to be shunned or cost him his freedom or his life. That's a big deal. 10 years after his first marriage, Grandpa Dave took a plural wife, Aldora's sister. Good gracious. So they just continued. Sorry. It's one thing to me to do the whole plural marriage thing. It's another thing when it's a sibling. I could not imagine sharing my man with my sister. I love my sister, but the thought of that is why I guess I'm not a part of this. Beth, my grandmother. Grandpa Dave eventually had 6 wives. As it turned out, Aldora, Aldora and another wife weren't able to have children. Fortunately, they were still able to be mothers within the large family. Grandpa Dave had 33 children of his own. He also raised another 7 brought into the family through marriage, including 6 children of a brother who had been killed in an automobile accident. To me, Grandpa Dave was a great example of a man of faith and family. I also soon discerned what qualities I wanted in a wife and mother for my children. I wanted someone who shared my fundamentalist beliefs and who put her faith first. Given her beliefs, I knew that girl I was dating was not part of that future, so I ended the relationship. As I graduated from high school in 1987, I finally had a few things figured out. I would pursue a business degree and give up my dream of playing college football. I threw my energy into earning money to pay for my studies at the University of Utah. I had my own lawn care business and also went to work on a construction crew. I didn't have time for another serious relationship, or so I thought. See, unlike Cody, this man didn't rely on the women in order to become who he is. He ventured out and tried different things on his own. That August, I went camping with my extended family at a nearby reserve. This family gathering brought together about 200 people, including Val and Vicky. Their oldest sister had married my uncle, and their older brother and I were friends. But I had not seen the twins since going on a date with each girl 2 years earlier. Neither date had been hugely successful. I laughed to myself as I remember what had happened. As is customary in my culture, I had to ask the twins' father permission to date them. My dad had counseled me about what to say, but I was still nervous. When I arrived at the twins' home, their father answered the door and joined me on the porch. "Step into my office," he said, leaning me to the Chevy Nova parked in the driveway. We got in. I was so stressed I could hardly speak. "I've been getting to know the twins, and I would like to get to know them more. I would appreciate your permission to take them out," I said. "Both of them?" he asked, surprised. "Yes, I don't know that I would take them out at the same time, but I like to get to know each a little better to see if there's any interest," I said. He said he checked with their mother and the girls and let me know. I liked their dad because their dad seemed to be very considerate of their feelings. A few days later, he called and told me I could go ahead and date his daughters. "Keep their mother informed about where you are going and what you are doing," he cautioned. Since I was interested in both girls, I flipped a coin to decide which one to take out first. Val won the toss, which led to the most humiliating date of my life. At that time, I worked after school on a cleaning crew at O.C. Tanner, a jewelry manufacturing company. I decided to take Val to the annual company party at the snowboard resort in Little Cottonwood Canyon. It was my first real date in high school, and I wanted to make a good impression. I borrowed my uncle's station wagon, which was a lot nicer than my dad's car. Once Val and I got to the party, I realized I didn't know anyone. We were the youngest people there and drew a lot of, "Oh, aren't they cute?" stares, especially when we danced. We left before the party ended so I could get Val home by her curfew. Once in the station wagon, I found that I couldn't turn the steering wheel or get the car to shift in reverse. I had been driving only for a couple of months and I had no idea what was wrong. It was 11 p.m., which meant I had 1 hour to get Val home, and we'd come a long way. Nothing I tried worked. We were stuck. We went back inside the building and I called my dad, who had already gone to bed. He arrived in our ratty car about 30 minutes later. He jumped in the station wagon, tugged on the steering wheel, pulled the car in reverse, and backed it out perfectly. He chuckled as he got out. "Sometimes you just have to pull on the wheel when you park on an incline," he said. I was so humiliated that I didn't even say a proper goodbye when I dropped Val off at her home. A few weeks later, I took Vicky to the homecoming dance at my school, and that didn't go much better. The day of the dance, a junior on the football team asked to double date with us. I was a sophomore and really looked up to him, so I agreed. Neither Vicky nor I knew how to answer the other couple's questions about how we met. That would have required revealing more information about our backgrounds than we wanted them to know. There were lots of awkward silences. The date was so strained that I waited a year before I gave Vicky the formal photos taken that night. Wow. I didn't take either Vicky or Val on a second date, and not just because the dates had gone so badly. I felt too much pressure about having to pick one over the other. Dating two girls at once seemed complicated, especially twin sisters who looked and acted so much alike. I feared I might mix them up. And what if they compared notes about our dates and about me? I left it alone despite my interest. Okay, so Vicky thought, and Val, I guess, that he wasn't interested in either one of them, but he didn't even want to go down that path, even though he was interested. But here they were again, out at a campground that August, and they were as cute as I remembered. I knew Val had already been rebaptized as a member of the Apostolic United Brethren, a fundamentalist Mormon group, and Vicky was checking out the AUB too. The twins had been raised as independents, and I was curious about their new beliefs and reasons for getting involved with an organized group. That weekend, we had long talks about the campfire, about religious doctrine, faith, family, and even plural marriage. There weren't many girls or people, for that matter, with whom I could talk about those subjects. I was intrigued by Val and Vicky and really enjoyed our conversations. But at the same time, I wasn't interested in starting up a relationship. For one thing, I faced the same dilemma I had years earlier. How was I supposed to choose between them? I didn't want to hurt either girl's feelings, and I didn't think I was mature enough to date both at once. Look at this man understanding that this was taking on a lot. A month later, there was another huge campfire gathering, and a third girl piqued my interest, Alina, one of Aunt Mom's younger sisters. I was friends with Alina's brother, and I had known who she was for years, but I never paid much attention to her until that camping trip. My interest started during one of the many fast-paced competitive volleyball games that took place that weekend. Unlike the twins, Alina wasn't athletic. In fact, she was downright clumsy. When serving, she would toss a volleyball in the air, swing at it, and miss. She finally began simply throwing the ball over the net when it was her turn to serve. Despite her lack of coordination, she didn't give up, and she met every wisecrack about her inability to serve with witty comeback. "Come on, Alina, you're supposed to hit the ball, not throw it," I teased her. "You better watch it, or it'll be you I'm hitting and not the ball," she countered. Her reply made me laugh. I liked Alina's spunk and her character. That fall, Vicky and Alina always seemed to be turning up at our social gatherings and coming to my house to visit the family. I was friendly, but to be honest, I tried to avoid the girls, which explains why Vicky said that they would be around there, but she didn't see a lot of them, but he was nice when she did. Besides, I didn't want to consider another relationship until I had resolved on my own the questions and doubts I had about my religion. So I ignored, the attention they were giving me. My mom really liked Alina and Vicky. That much was obvious, and was constantly asking what I thought about them, which made me bristle. I didn't want my parents involved in my dating life. I didn't like the pressure or being made to feel guilty because I didn't want to deal with them. But that didn't stop my siblings from teasing me every time Alina or Vicky came around. It went on like this for months. One day my dad and I were cleaning the carport together, and he nonchalantly commented on the two girls' frequent visits. "You can't just leave them hanging forever," he said. "You either have to tell them to move on with their lives, or you've got to act. A man is under certain obligations to find out what God wants of him. You need to make a study of praying and fasting about it. That's how you get your answers." My dad was suggesting that I take the time intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually to figure out how to respond to Alina and Vicky. Fasting, a common practice in our religion of going without food for one or more days to achieve the proper spirit of humility and contemplation, would help me get answers to serious questions before me. That conversation with my dad scared me. I didn't want to have to face the fact that no matter what answer I got, I would have to act on it. But I put my faith in God and let go of my own will, trusting that prayer would bring the insight I needed to know what to do. I got my answer when I least expected it. Alina and some of her other friends were at my house, and the group of us stayed up late into the night visiting. I was sitting across the room listening to and watching Alina talk. All of a sudden, it was as though my eyes blinked open and I saw her for the first time. Her heart, her soul, the person she was and would be. I had never experienced anything like it, and it was a life-changing moment for me. In that instant, I fell in love with Alina, and I knew she would be my wife. But I faced a dilemma. What about Vicky? I had been attracted to Vicky since that homecoming date in high school. My connection to her seemed timeless somehow, and I knew I had strong feelings for her. She had a firm faith, revealed a good and loving character, and would be an excellent wife and mother. She was exactly the sort of woman I wanted to marry. As I thought through my situation, I realized that as much as I might have wanted to run from the truth and the responsibilities it would entail, deep down I wanted to live all the principles of my faith, including, if possible, plural marriage. But could I pursue a relationship with both Alina and Vicky? I began to let down my guard and spend time with both of them. I found that they were always together and had become best friends. I could tell, too, that they knew of each other's interest in me, but weren't threatened by it. Their actions, they let me know that I could get to know them both without choosing one over the other. My dad was compiling a family guidebook at the time, and my mother, brother, and I were working on the project. My mom invited Vicky and Alina to help. One March day, when we were proofreading, Vicky randomly selected an excerpt from a sermon by Brigham Young, a former LDS church president, for me to read aloud. This is for you, young women who want to get husbands. Now, girls, court up the boys. It's leap year. Give them to understand in some way that it's all right. You are ready and you want to help them make a good home, to form a nucleus around which to gather the blessings and the comforts of life, a place to rally to. Tell the boys what to do, and your sisters of experience, ye mothers in Israel, go to and get up your societies and teach these girls what to do and how to get the boys to come and marry them. Which might be why we see a lot of times that the women are pursuing the men, because this is what this excerpt is basically telling them to do. To go get your man, girl. By the time I finished reading, I was beat red. My mother, brother, and the two girls burst out laughing. A month later, I went to Vicky and Alina's fathers to ask permission to formally begin dating. It's not common in our culture for a man to date two women at once, and Alina's dad was worried, especially because we don't believe in casual dating. You're taking on too much too soon, he told me when I met him. I'm not asking permission to marry Alina, I said, just to get to know her better. Y'all, I'm sorry. My stomach is growling, and I'm going to keep going. So if you hear it, don't mind. It's just my stomach. He didn't like it, but he didn't say no, nor did Vicky's dad. So I moved forward with what would turn out to be a 2-year courtship. But now that I had the permission I needed, I was overwhelmed. How was I supposed to go about courting 2 girls? How was I going to get to know 2 girls who were already better friends with each other than with me? There wasn't exactly a rule book for such matters. I prayed about it, asked my parents for advice and scripture for how to build 2 strong, interconnected, spiritually grounded relationships. I decided that since Alina and Vicky were close friends and we were interested in pursuing me together, and they were interested in pursuing me together, the best thing to do was for me to nurture that combined friendship. It would have been easier for me to pursue separate, distinct relationships with each girl, but I saw that as setting up a competitive trap that would likely never overcome. I was attracted to both girls, and I knew that individual relationships would develop in time. The most important task now was to develop a unity as a potential family. He went into this thing extremely intentional. I can respect that. After dating for several months, I asked Alina and Vicky to commit exclusively and even more seriously to pursuing a life together. I told them that communication, trust, and respect, what I refer to as CTR, would need to be the cornerstone of our relationship if we were going to have any chance of success. These values, important to all relationships, are especially critical for a successful plural marriage. I can agree with that. With those values guiding us, we continued on in typical dating fashion. Movies, ballroom dancing lessons. Yes, I had to drag my younger brothers along as a fourth. Picnics and hikes, long canyon drives, and family barbecues and camping trips for my 19th birthday. Alina and Vicky prepared a spectacular candlelight dinner served on my mother's china. We also often met to read scriptures together, sessions that were always followed by long discussions about doctrine and faith that focused on the hows and whys of the path we were pursuing. Marriage, whether monogamous or plural, is not taken lightly in our culture, and these conversations helped us think through the commitment we were contemplating. I think that, and no offense for those of you who are polygamous, because I do know that there are polygamists that watch, or people who believe in it. I do think that one of the mistakes that we've seen on television is that the shorter courtships seem to not last, or not be as happy in their marriage as the longer ones. Now, I don't know this family. I don't even know if they're still together. I know they were a couple years ago because we saw them on the Browns while the Browns were in Flagstaff. But it seems to me like because they took so much time to study with each other, to research doctrine together, to get to know one another, to cultivate their own relationships, both with this man and with one another, that it helped with their success. Each relationship had its own ebb and flow. Once we took my little sister to an amusement park near Salt Lake City, I had a terrible time. Alina and Vicky shunned me most of the day. It is tough when the woman treats you with indifference when two do it in concert. It's powerful. I learned later that they had been working through some jealousy issues and needed to focus on each other, not me. The obstacle thrown up by Alina's family were also hard to take. Alina worked for a dentist who was a fundamentalist Mormon and followed what I refer to as the Short Creek Doctrine, the religious philosophy of what became the FLDS church. Alina and the dentist's son had once liked each other, and some of Alina's sisters weren't happy that she was dating me. They were constantly nagging Alina to drop me and date the son again. Alina's dad caused even bigger problems. He was a short, barrel-chested man with slick back hair and a Brigham Young style beard that hung from the rim of his jaw to his chest. He was very intimidating character. He made his displeasure about our courtship known by going into another room or out the back door of their home, even if he saw me coming. Here's the thing about stuff like that. I asked permission. You didn't say no, so don't treat me like that just because you don't like it. You should have said no. Although Alina was nearly 19, he monitored our telephone calls. For a time, he limited our dates to once a week, and he often set outrageous curfews. I picked Alina up one night at 6 o'clock, only to learn she had to be home by 8. Months after telling me I could court Alina, he claimed he had given permission only for a few dates. The more Alina's dad or others tried to interfere, the more determined we were to succeed. At times, my emotions were all over the place. I was attracted to Alina and Vicky, but I was cautious, excited but fearful, confident but unsure. My goal was to be honorable and to not let passion or lust rule our relationship. Truthfully, it wasn't always possible to balance my feelings between them. The relationships progressed in different ways and at different speeds. The girls had very different personalities. Vicky was quiet, reserved, and tentative, but very affectionate. Alina was bright, outspoken, and spontaneous, but not as expressive with affection. I had a different view of appropriate dating behavior from that of most guys my age. I drew the line at kissing and unequivocally considered premarital sex unacceptable, but I had not seriously dated anyone before courting Alina and Vicky. And I discovered it was much harder than I thought not to let desire overtake me. Everything hinged on okay, let me go back. That's one of the reasons why a lot of times in these relationships that they get married so quickly, for that very reason, because they're afraid that they're going to let desire overtake them. Everything hinged on my not acting selfishly, since Alina and Vicky were relying on my moral character to guide the development of our relationship. One way I avoided temptation was by limiting our one-on-one dates. That helped, but it still wasn't easy. One night, we spread blankets in my parents' backyard to stargaze and talk. Alina fell asleep, and Vicky and I ended up making out. We felt terrible for days. It wasn't the first time we kissed, but it absolutely wasn't inappropriate to do so in that setting. If Alina had woken up and found Vicky and me kissing, it would have been horrible for all of us. I went to Alina later, confessed what happened, and offered an apology for violating her trust and being disrespectful towards her. I apologized to Vicky too, and I wanted Vicky to know I considered my behavior inappropriate. Otherwise, she might easily have thought I was doing the same thing behind her back with Alina. That experience provided powerful motivation for me to stick to my principles. The fact that he did that and he explained to his other potential wife what he did, I'm liking Joe more and more. I liked him on the show when he was all organized and all those things, but I'm liking him more and more, and this is making me feel like he wasn't putting on for the show. Now, is he perfect? No, but I'm just saying. After dating for 18 months, we were finally committed to each other. We share the same beliefs, the same hopes for the future, and the same goals for family. After fasting and praying about it, we set a goal of marrying by the summer. At the end of May 1989, I sought out each girl's father to ask permission to marry his daughter. If Vicky's dad had any concerns, he hadn't voiced them, which was in keeping with his strong feelings about the importance of freely making your own decisions and then taking responsibilities for them. In his view, Vicky was old enough to make a choice and live with its consequences. He gave his approval. Alina's father was a very different story. He didn't return any of my phone calls and managed never to be around when I stopped by either of his two homes. Days passed before I hunted him down at his mother's house, where he was working in the garage. I spent an hour making small talk until some other men who were there. Then I got to the point. Until some of the other men who were there left. Then I got to my point. "I'd like your permission to marry Alina," I said to her father. "What if I tell you no and ask you to back off?" he said sharply. "Well, that's your right, but I disagree with it," I said. "Damn right it's my right," he said. Oh, Alina's father then asked if I had a revelation, which in his view meant a personal visitation from a heavenly messenger informing me that Alina was to be my wife. It was an unusual, irrational, and his family unprecedented demand, and he knew it. It seemed like the only thing he could come up with to justify telling me no. I was a good kid, came from a solid family, shared his fundamental faith, and Alina and I loved each other. I told Alina's father that I had strong belief that she was the right person for me, the same kind of belief he must have had when he married Alina's mother. "Belief and knowledge are two different things," he said. "You need to know. Let's say I get a revelation that she's right for me and come and ask for your permission. How will you know I'm telling you the truth?" I asked. "What makes you so great that you would get a revelation and not I?" Okay, I'm going to be honest. If I was Joe, all of that right there, I wouldn't have anything else to say to Alina's father. Forget what I'm supposed to do in terms of permission. She's old enough to decide herself, and you're being difficult for no reason. You should have told me no from the beginning. I'm not feeling this. Alina's father asked. That was the kicker. Apparently, in his view, he would need to get the same revelation from the same heavenly messenger. Let's just say that for whatever reason I got it and you did not. Are you saying I would have to wait for you to get it also? I pressed yes. The conversation went on like that for an hour. I left angry, disappointed, and frustrated. I was still upset hours later when I told Alina and Vicky about it. It was an unrealistic requirement. I had no expectation of satisfying his demands since I did not believe a heavenly messenger would make an appearance for such a purpose. I wanted to be married and nothing was going as I hoped. We were adults and I could have gone ahead with the marriage if we wanted, but I did not want to marry Alina without her father's permission. And I did not want to marry Vicky without also marrying Alina. Goodness gracious. He's a better man than I. Well, I'm not a man. But you get what I'm saying. He's a better person than me. I don't like stuff like that. I have faith that with the Lord's help, the path would open if our marriages were meant to be. In the meantime, I vowed to learn whatever lessons I could from the situation. So we waited. Spent a lot of time fixing up a trailer house I had moved onto some land my family owned. The thought that this would be our first home helped me stay positive and focused. 6 months passed. At the end of 1989, Alina's dad told us he would give us an answer about a marriage in 2 months. After fasting and praying about it, in mid-February, I went to Alina's dad again, asked him to go on a 3-day fast with us while we prayed for the answer. He agreed at first, but later told Alina he had changed his mind and he wouldn't join us. We went ahead anyway as we begun the fast. Alina's father finally told her to just go ahead with the marriage if she wanted to. At the end of the 3rd day of our fast, I went to Alina's home and asked for her father. "I'm here for Alina," I told him. We had waited 2 years and my attitude was, "Parents be done, get out the way." I know that's right. Alina's father was resigned to our marriage at that point and didn't say much. He stepped aside as Alina came to join me. Alina, Vicky, and I were married the same day in the ceremony, partnered after that sacred marriage ordinance performed in LDS church temples. Our wedding took place in a private home and were witnessed by a few members of the family. My father rarely expressed his feelings, but afterward he gave me, Alina, and Vicky each a warm embrace and said how much he loved us. "You're my daughters too now," he told my wives. Tears welled in my eyes, and I suspected that though he would not have admitted it, behind my father's tinted glasses there were tears in his eyes as well. We did not have a reception, public announcement of marriage to anyone but the most trusted friends and family has always been a risky endeavor given the illegal status and historical persecution associated with plural marriage. But that night we celebrated with a small group at the Red Flame restaurant, a steakhouse that had also a ballroom and dance floor. All those dancing lessons paid off that night. I also regained new insight as I experienced my own twinge of jealousy. As I danced with Vicky, a guy spotted Alina and asked her to dance. He didn't know she was taken then, and Alina was too polite to turn him down. When he asked Alina for a second dance, I intervened. We had a good laugh about it later, but it gave me a small glimpse of what Alina and Vicky had to endure every day. See, I like the fact this man is admitting that he experienced jealousy. Whereas we saw Cody not even be willing to entertain the fact when Mary said, like, how would you feel if I was with other men? Here this man is saying, I saw my wife dancing with another man. I became jealous and it made me think of what my wives experience. That night, I felt both relief and apprehension. Relief, our life together was finally beginning, and apprehension because of the unknowns ahead. I wondered if, despite all my efforts, I was adequately prepared for my new life. If I had grown so close to Alina and Vicky during our courtship, but now after putting it off for so long, I faced the reality of having multiple intimate relationships. I was proud to be their husband, but humbled by what that commitment actually meant. Alina. For a time as a teenager, I had one thing on my mind, and it wasn't marriage. My P word, not polygamy, but party. I was wild hanging out with my older siblings and the other kids who were into drinking and smoking and carrying on without a care in the world. I finally came to my senses in my last year of high school when I realized I was headed for nothing but trouble. As I started thinking about what kind of life I wanted for myself, one guy stood out because he was already moving in the direction I wanted to go. The guy was Joe. I knew Joe because of my older sister, with whom I was very close, had married his father, and I would see him occasionally at family gatherings. In junior high, I had an encounter with Joe that left a lasting impression. I had gone with my sister to pick up Joe after football practice. There were groceries in the backseat of her Monte Carlo, so Joe had to sit in the front next to me. As Joe slid into the seat, our bodies brushed against each other, and in that instant, it felt to me like a magnetic force fell over us, pulling us together. The feeling flashed powerfully but briefly and then was gone, and I didn't know what to make of it. I certainly never experienced anything like that sensation with guys I've dated. In high school, I heard lots of talk about Joe because he was quite popular and many girls were after him. I'm surprised she heard a lot, because didn't we hear that she had to go to night school? So I wonder at what point she heard this. He had good values and was really grounded, yet he was willing to think outside the box and already had a lot of plans for his life. I decided to check Joe out again when his football team played at my school. I went to the game to watch him. Oh, they didn't even go to the same school and she was hearing stuff about him? He must have been really good. Joe was the captain of the team, and I could see that he played with a lot of heart, passion, and energy. Everything I knew about Joe made me want to know more, but it was a year before I made a move. In the fall of 1987, I began going by the Darkers' home more often to visit my sister and always accepted any invitations to the family get-togethers. I found that I really liked Joe, but I kept my feelings for him secret. Joe had started college and had a lot going on, so I only saw him once in a while, but I was getting to know his family, especially Joe's mom, quite well. Joe's family was always doing fun things, hiking, going to aerobic classes, painting, camping, playing volleyball, having barbecues, and going on long bike rides. My cousins, Vicky and Val, were often at Joe's house too. I knew that Vicky had liked Joe for a long time, but I figured she was still trying to make up in her mind about him as I was. I kept hoping someone else would catch Vicky's interest, and if that didn't happen, I figured Joe would just have to decide between the two of us. But Joe's mom, who knew that Vicky and I were both interested in Joe, had a different idea. She brought it up one day after I called to ask her what I could bring to the New Year's Eve party with the family hosting. The conversation turned serious. You like Joe and Vicky likes Joe, she said. Instead of competing for him, why don't you just get together and date him? I don't know if I could do that, I said. In fact, I wasn't sure if I even wanted to consider it. In the days leading up to the party, where I knew I would see Vicky, a million thoughts filled my head. I thought of all the things I would be giving up according to the standards of the world if I agreed to a dual courtship, mainly the luxuries of a one-on-one relationship where I wouldn't have to think of anyone else I fell in love. I would have to build two relationships, not just one from scratch, at the same time and to the same depth. I wasn't sure if I was capable of that. I knew it would take a huge amount of openness and honesty. Was I ready and willing to trust that deeply? Was Joe mature enough to handle the emotions and feelings of two women sensitively and fairly? But all those concerns collapsed under my belief in the law of celestial marriage as an essential aspect of my deepening faith. Despite the way my family's secret lifestyle had sometimes made me feel as a child, I really liked growing up in a plural family and I admired both my mothers. Although as a teenager I spent time partying and dating guys who weren't into the lifestyle, I decided I believed in plural marriage and hoped to live it someday. If I found the right person and I wasn't set on having a special period alone with a husband as a monogamous first wife, in fact, I saw a benefit in being the second or third wife. I would have the opportunity to observe how a man treated his other wives and children and how the women interacted with each other and the husband's children before committing myself. As I spent more and more time thinking about what Joe's mom had suggested, I realized there were advantages to starting married life immediately with a sister wife. We would be able to create a family culture together, and I would be spared of having to adjust later if another woman entered the family. I decided to proceed cautiously and to get to know Vicky better before making up my mind. At the New Year's Eve party, Vicky and I stayed up all night talking. I found that while our personalities were very different, we had a lot in common. About 2 weeks into the new year, I was looking for something to do one day and decided to invite Vicky and Val ice skating. To my surprise, they accepted and we had a great time. From that point on, Vicky and I were fast friends, always together, and Joy wasn't even in the picture. These women became friends first. They dated each other first. Vicky and I discovered was very accepting. Vicky, I discovered, was very accepting and good natured. A creative and a talented person, she easily picked up everything she tried, from learning the piano to playing tennis. More important, she was deeply committed to doing what she felt was right. Her faith was strong, and like me, she hoped to create a very close family someday. I could see that if we became sister wives, she had qualities that could make it possible to work through the challenges. And even if it didn't work out with Joe, I knew she would always be a good friend. Vicky and I never sat down and had a heart-to-heart talk about our mutual interest in Joe. We didn't have to. We just knew we were in it together, but we didn't joke about it. Joe had been interested in a girl named Sandy, but we did joke about it. Okay, Joe had been interested in a girl named Sandy in high school, and before Joe ever acknowledged our interest, Vicky and I congratulated each other on the special 2-for-1 deal we were offering him. Another time, the Jefferson Starship song, "Nothing's Gonna Stop Us Now," came on the radio, and we changed the words in the second line to fit us, and we could build this dream together. Sandy's gonna forever. Nothing's gonna stop us now. Joe finally came to us one day and asked us if it would be all right if he spoken to our fathers about getting to know us better. I had already let my dad know that Vicky and I were both wanting to date Joe, and he was concerned. He didn't think we were mature enough to deal with the feelings and the complications that would come with a 3-way relationship at such a young age. I think my dad expected our efforts to fail their own accord without his intervention, so he gave Joe permission to get to know me. Our decision to date mostly together created some interesting exchanges. On one early date, we were on the Heber Creeper, a historic train that takes passengers on a scenic ride through Provo Canyon. Afterward, we went on a horseback trail, and the guide cooked our group a meal. He tried to engage the various couples and families, friendly talking around the campfire. He was clearly puzzled by us. "Are you all related, family? He asked. "Friends," Joe quickly answered as Vicky and I exchanged smiles. It was a question we got often over the months of our courtship. We rarely had held hands or displayed affection in public, but once in a while people figured us out. For my birthday, we went to Park City to ride the Alpine slide. Afterwards, we had lunch and then window shopped along Main Street. A store owner was sweeping the walkway outside his business as we passed by. He stared, sizing up the situation. "2, huh? Hardly seems fair," he said, shaking his head as he went back inside the store. I don't know why I picture that guy to be an older gentleman being judgmental, but that's just what came to my mind. We often went back camping with our families, and one evening, Joe, Vicky, and I stayed up late talking with my parents and other relatives. Finally, we said our good nights and headed off to our separate tents. As I slipped into my tent, I overheard an exchange between my dad and his brother-in-law, who were still seated next to the campfire. "Are they dating each other?" my dad's brother-in-law asked, gesturing in the direction of Joe and Vicky had gone. My dad threw his hands in the air in an exasperated voice and said, "Yes, you don't know the half of it. Literally, you don't know the half of it." When my dad saw how serious we were and realized that the problem wasn't going away, he tried to derail the relationship by making it difficult for me to see Joe. Sometimes my dad wouldn't let me go out at all, and he'd never thrown up such hurdles for my siblings. Meanwhile, Vicky had the freedom to see Joe as much as she wanted. As a result, she developed a closeness and an ease around him sooner than I did. One semester, Joe took a large class load. He was working part-time too. As finals approached, he was under lots of stress and got sick. He had high fever and chills, and could barely get out of bed. Vicky and I went to Joe's house to help care for him. Vicky seemed to slip naturally into the role of comforter, where I felt like a third wheel. I just seemed to be in the way, which left me feeling hurt and jealous. It wasn't easy for me to show Joe attention and affection, especially around Vicky. I was more focused on building a spiritual foundation for our relationship, and so I didn't let my guard down as fast with Joe. Vicky and Joe kissed first, which bothered me. It wasn't that I didn't expect them to be intimate and one of us had to be kissed first, but it made me wonder whether Joe liked Vicky more than I. I felt too that my dad was holding me back. It's funny how at different points the both of them felt like he was closer to the other. Interesting. In my culture, parents are to be respected, so for a long time I went along with the rules my dad set. I was an adult and I could have made my own decisions, but I was determined to show my dad that I was going about things honorably. In my culture, parents are to be respected also, and you're supposed to do what they tell you to do, but once you move out the house, there's only so much they can do. Just my culture. When he finally got totally unreasonable, though, I stopped asking permission to see Joe, and I just let my parents know where I was going and when I would be home. Even though we were young and inexperienced at relationships, Joe understood the sacrifices Vicky and I were making as we once shared a life together. He tried to be respectful of our feelings and worked hard at learning what was important to Vicky in a relationship and what mattered to me. But we still encountered challenges. Some made it more difficult by our own insecurities. Vicky couldn't eat when she got stressed, but I turned to food for comfort. I grew up with 5 older sisters who were always worried about their weight, which had never been a problem for me until I turned 16 and puberty hit like a hurricane. I went from a size 3 to a size 9 in less than 6 months and had a hard time accepting the challenges in my body. Oh my God, I miss being a size 9. New year, maybe I'll do a resolution. I saw myself as fat and had a very negative self-image. Joe had unwittingly already made me feel self-conscious about it too. Before he knew I liked him, I was at his house with a bunch of other people. Joe told everyone he was really good at guessing people's weight. That's kind of weird. And started going around the room, picking out people and estimating how much each person weighed. He was within a few pounds every time. I was horrified. I got up and slipped out of the room before he got to me. A year later, after Vicky and I had started dating Joe, my self-image took another hit. As my feelings for Joe grew stronger, issues that would rarely come up in a normal relationship became a challenge. It was hard to have to think about talking through every detail. What was the proper way to show affection to Joe in front of each other? Who sat next to him in the car? When was it okay to hold his hand to kiss? Where were the boundaries? What did we need to do to show respect for each other? Under the pressure, food became my guilty pleasure. While Vicky lost weight, I gained, swinging up to 145 pounds. This exacerbated my feelings of insecurity, especially since Joe was lean and well-built and considered fitness a big deal. Unhappy with my appearance, I frequently closed myself off emotionally. Joe had no idea what was going on or what triggered my emotional shutdowns. So she wasn't being honest because they said that whole thing that he needed communication and trust and whatever else, and she wasn't telling him what was going on. For one of our first dates, we decided to see a play at a theater in Salt Lake City and then go to dinner. I spent hours at the mall shopping for the right outfit to wear, thinking that something new might boost my confidence, and then realized I'd cut too close and had to rush home. When Joe and Vicky arrived to pick me up right on time, I was still getting ready. I finally went out, climbed in the back seat. Vicky, of course, was already sitting next to Joe in the front. I apologized and said I had gotten home late after shopping for new clothes. We won't get in until intermission now, but at least you have some cute clothes, Joe said, his voice tinged with irritation and sarcasm. When they both laughed at it, I sank down in my seat, feeling hurt, humiliated, and angry. Afterward, Joe dropped me off at my auntie's house. It was late and the house was quiet. I slipped into the kitchen, was illuminated only by a nightlight. I grabbed a carton of burnt almond fudge ice cream from the freezer and a loaf of homemade bread and began eating. By the time I finished, half of the carton was gone and nearly all the bread, and I hadn't tasted any of it. All I could think about was how silly and shallow I must have seemed to Joe earlier that evening. Finally crawled into the bed, I shared with the younger sister who was still awake. How was the date, she asked. Okay, but I'm not sure if I'm going to fit with them after all, I said. Why, she asked. It's a lot harder than I thought it would be, I said. I'm really discouraged. I just want to go to sleep. Don't give up too fast, she said. You three seem great together. That night, I would later learn, Joe talked to his mother about our date. He told her he had missed the first half of the play because of my shopping trip and added that I had been very quiet all evening. Joe's mom knew I was sensitive about my appearance and immediately filled in the nuances Joe had missed. The next day, Joe called and asked if he could meet with me. As we sat in his truck, Joe apologized to his rude comments the night before. You looked really good last night. You always do. And I'm sorry if I hurt you, he said. I didn't mean to. I just really got frustrated because we had made arrangements. Joe has always said, from what I've seen, that he likes to be on time. That's one of his things, and I can understand that. I shouldn't have been late, I agreed. I kept hoping to find an outfit that made me look slim, and there weren't any. I like how you look, he said. Then he added, but if you want, we could go on a diet and exercise program together. To me, this showed that Joe recognized the sensitivity I felt and wanted to help me deal with it in a positive way. It also let me know my weight wasn't an issue for him. I was grateful for Joe's offer, and the three of us later began what would be the first of many Healthy Boost programs. That summer, I got a job in the same medical supply company where Vicky worked, and we usually sat side by side so we could visit. There were times, though, that I kept my distance, choosing to be a booth as far away from Vicky as possible, so I could sort through. I guess she's trying to say, I don't know what she's trying to say. Is there a booth in between them? She tried to be away from Vicky so she could sort through her raw feelings in silence. Sometimes I jumped to conclusions, often the wrong conclusions, which resulted in misunderstandings. I figured, for example, that when Joe took me home first, it meant he wanted extra time with Vicky because he liked her more. It was a while before I realized that Joe rotated which girl he took home first. Okay, girl, come on now. You gotta get it together, girl. And sometimes the hurts were real. One evening, Vicky and I were at Joe's house. We spent the day together just hanging out. Vicky's mom called and told her to come home. She thought Vicky was spending too much time with Joe. I offered to wait at Joe's house while he drove Vicky home. I thought that this would be a good opportunity for Joe and me to get some time to work on a relationship. It should have taken Joe 30 minutes, but he was gone for several hours and seemed distraught when he returned. I thought maybe he and Vicky had a fight. Are you okay? I asked. He hesitated, then took my hand. Let's drive over to the park and talk, he said. We were both silent as we got in the car. As Joe began driving, I noticed that the Subaru's windows were fogged up. And just like that, I knew why it had taken Joe so long to return home. I was sick inside and couldn't believe Joe was so obvious to the telltale sign that they left behind. I knew that Vicky and I each had our own personal relationship with Joe, but it was hard to have it staring me in the face. I wanted to open the car door and run away as fast as I could. Instead, I just sat there in silence, and so did Joe. A few minutes, I noticed a tear running down Joe's cheek. This is the hardest thing I've ever tried to do in my life, he said. I don't want to hurt you. I feel so weak. I don't know if I'm worthy to live this principle. I was hurting too, but listening to him express his feelings of remorse about his behavior made me realize what a seemingly impossible situation it was. And this would truly require of me of this all. Okay, I'm going to get back to that. But they have these pictures really in an odd place, because it's pictures in here, and it says in 1945, 15 men, including 5 darker relatives, were convicted of unlawful cohabitation because of their plural marriages. The men are shown outside the Utah State Prison before beginning their sentences, front row from left to right. It lists a whole bunch of different people, some of which have the Darger's last name, but also there is Lena's great-grandfather in here. Joe's grandfather is in here. Elena, Vicky, and Val's grandfather, and Joe's great-great-grandfather. So basically, a lot of the men in their families, let me put it close, were doing a sentence. They then have a picture of Joe, Elena, and Vicky posed for this portrait in November 1989, several months before their marriage. And yes, the photographer wondered what was going on. Oh, shoot. I can't even see it. I hope y'all can see it, because I sure can't. I just want to make sure y'all see the pictures. They got Vicky, Joe, and Elena. They married on February 18, 1990, in their private ceremony. That's going to be at the top. Then they're going to have Vicky, Kyra, Elena, and Joe after Kyra's birth in 2000. I think Kyra is the daughter that passed. That's them on their marriage day, their wedding day. That's them after Kyra was born. Joe and Val's engagement photo taken June 17, 2000. And then the day that he married Val, which is Vicky's twin. Y'all, this is such a random. I just want to make sure y'all see these. This is the Mormon Focus. This is the 2003 cover. The creators of HBO's series said that this was a part of their inspiration for the show. Interesting. Isn't that interesting? That this family was before the Browns. Then we see some of the kids. We see Joe and Elena in 2004. Some of the kids. Joe and Elena. Oh my God. They got a lot of pictures. Christmas. More pictures. More pictures. Joe and Vicky. Y'all, it's a lot of pictures. Then the Darker children, several cousins playing on pumpkins. And then in 2009, they have all the children in the picture but 2. So that's Pumpkin. And then this is all the children in the picture with them but 2. All right, back to reading. The challenge of balancing 3 relationships was hitting home more than ever. At that moment, I grasped how it would be to develop an unselfish love, not only for Joe, but for Vicky too. We talked for hours. Joe told me how hard it was to manage the physical side of 2 relationships. He told me he would work harder at being more respectful in his choices, at strengthening his spiritual basis of our relationship. He told me he was amazed, grateful, and humbled by my willingness to work through his challenges. So Vicky and Joe had multiple moments where they were making out, because we were told about them stargazing and them making out, and now apparently they made out in the car too. This wasn't just a one-time thing. Interesting. We finally parted. I knew that Joe respected and loved me, not just out of passion, but also for who I was and who we were together. That night, we forged a bond that was deeper than ever. I realized that at my weakest moment, I had found my greatest strength. I was staying at Aunt T's house that weekend, and she was sitting at the kitchen table when I came in. She asked how my evening had gone. Good, I told her, but she could read through my face. Cheerful and perspective, despite the late, or rather early hour. Auntie asked me to sit and share a piece of pie with her. You know, things get easier, Auntie said. As time goes by, you come into your own. It's your faith that gets you through. As we talked, I was amazed at how well she understood what I was experiencing. In the early days, I would get jealous and angry. She said, I would think, why am I upset? Why do I care? He's not so special. He's just a man, nothing so great. We laughed so hard, our stomachs hurt. Then I realized it was about so much more than that, about a bigger picture. Auntie said what we created was real, a family. It felt good to be able to share my feelings with Auntie and to realize I was becoming part of an exclusive club of women who had gone through this experience and remained strong, independent individuals who loved, believed in, and found happiness in plural marriage. But learning to handle the misunderstandings, hurts, jealousies was, I found, an ongoing process. One night after a date, Joe dropped me off before Vicky. The next day at work, Vicky kept falling asleep at her workstation. I realized they had stayed out late together, and I was really ticked off. I was feeling ornery, when Joe met us for lunch. Sensing that I was upset, he gave me a hug and was very attentive. My defense shell began to crack. As we sat on the lawn eating, Joe told some jokes and Vicky started laughing. I began laughing too. I looked at Vicky and thought, what's the big deal? Does it take anything away from our relationship from them to have one as well? In that moment, I realized how much I cared about Vicky. I tried to envision my life without her in it, and I was flooded with thoughts of how much God cared for each of our souls and how he wanted us to just care lovingly for each other. My perspective shifted. I knew there would still be hard moments ahead, but I was able to go forward truly wanting the best for Vicky. During our courtship, Vicky and I had spoken to a lot of women who were in plural marriages and seeking advice on how to make our relationships work. The conversation solidified our conviction that plural marriage was the right thing for us to follow. We could see the challenges, but also the opportunities for spiritual and emotional growth. All the principles of religion we knew would be put to the test, being selfless, acting charitably, loving beyond yourself, being honest and open, and having faith that God was there watching over everything. One weekend, Vicky went on a trip, which allowed me to spend time alone with Joe. We spent one afternoon in a park close to my home. Joe and I hiked down into a gully and sat next to a creek that runs through it. By the time we hiked back up the hill, it was dusk and the evening had turned cold. As we wrapped a blanket around us, I noticed Joe shaking a little. Are you cold? Do you want to leave? I asked him. No. Sometimes I shake when I get nervous, he said. That made me nervous. His face shadowed in the growing darkness, giving me no hint as to his intentions. Alina, I love you, he said, wrapping his arms around me. I really love you. My heart was pounding, yet my soul felt deep peace when Joe spoke those words. I told Joe I love him too. I found my soulmate, and I knew our love and respect would carry us through whatever the future held. Not long after that, Joe went to our father's to ask for permission to get married. Not surprisingly, my dad wanted us to wait. I decided to be respectful, not to proceed without his blessings. Vicky did have a father's approval, so even though my heart was breaking, as I said, I told Joe and Vicky to go ahead without me. Joe refused. Absolutely not, he said. We started this together and we're doing this together. My trust and love for Joe and Vicky too soared. It meant everything that they were willing to put their dreams and desires on hold to wait for me. 6 months later, at the end of 1989, Joe went to my dad again for permission. My dad said he would give Joe an answer in 2 months. After those 2 months passed, Joe went to my dad, asked him to join in a 3-day fast as he considered the answer. At first, my dad agreed, but then he changed his mind and refused to participate. I was frustrated and resentful. The day started the fast. I was at a family party, struggling against the temptations of all that food and doing my best to ignore my father. He called me over and said, sit next to me. I'll tell you what, he said. You have my permission to get married, but you don't have my blessing. That was good enough for me. I figured the blessing would eventually come, and it did. I gave my dad a big hug before leaving to let Vicky and Joe know. They were at Joe's house in his father's office after I told them the news. Joe got down on one knee, took both of our hands, and said, will you marry me? We burst out laughing. Proposing wasn't a big deal as it is today, but it was pretty creative to ask 2 women at once. Joe wouldn't really have had to ask, though. Marriage has been our goal from the start. All right, y'all. Sorry that was a little long, but I told y'all that I didn't want to cut off Joe's part in that last read along. Hopefully you guys still tune in. I do think that this book is good. I am enjoying the fact that we're finding more about them and their families and truly seeing the love times 3, hence the title. If you have not done so already, please like the video. It helps the channel. Please give me a thumbs up, like, ah! I don't know where that sound came from. Please subscribe if you have not done so already. We are on the road to 1,000 and we are getting there sooner than later. And leave me a comment. What do y'all think about this love story so far? Until next time.